The case we are going to talk about today is an unusual one. It seems like so many of these missing persons cases follow the same patterns. A person goes missing, and from the clues, or lack of them, it is often a random act of violence. This case seemed to be that way at first, but there are so many other twists and turns to be navigated, it makes you wonder what really happened and why. Here we will try to sort out all the details. Let's talk first about Mary Shotwell Little. Mary Little seemed to be in a good place in her life. She had gotten married on Labor Day weekend to Roy Little Jr. just 6 weeks prior to this incident and lived with him in an apartment in Decatur, Georgia. She worked as a secretary to E.M. Rackley at the Citizens and Southern National Bank, Mitchell Street branch in Atlanta. Her husband, who was a bank examiner, had been out of town in LaGrange, Georgia for work, but was to be back the next day. Thursday, October 14th, 1965, started out as just another day for the 25-year-old newlywed. She had gone to work and left a little early to do some shopping and then out to dinner with her coworker, Ilya Stock, at Lenox Square Shopping Center. Ms. Stock said Mary was in excellent spirits. They had dinner around 6:15 p.m. and visited for a bit, then Mary said she really ought to be getting home. She was expecting company that weekend and needed to clean the apartment. She had also purchased several things, including meat, that she needed to get in the refrigerator. The coworker looked at her watch and noticed it was 8 p.m. and Mary said, "Well, I'll see you in the morning," but unfortunately, she would never see her friend again. Friday morning soon came, and when Mary didn't show up for work, her coworkers were concerned. Mary was a very reliable employee and a secretary to Mr. Rackley for the last 3 years. This was certainly uncharacteristic of her to not show up for work and not to call. They phoned Mary's apartment, but no answer. Mary's friend, whom she had been with the night before, then called the newlywed's landlord to check out the apartment. She said the newspaper and mail were still outside from yesterday, and there was no sign of the groceries which Mary had purchased. After speaking to the friend who had gone out with her, Mary's boss knew this was no typical disappearance. He brought a picture of Mary to the police and told them she was missing, and then drove to Lenox Square himself to look for her. There is some confusion as to who actually discovered the car, Lenox Security or Mary's boss, but on Friday around noon, Mary's 1965 gray Mercury Comet was discovered in the Lenox Square parking lot. The security guards were adamant that Mary's car was not there overnight or even at 6 a.m. when they had patrolled the lot, but it had been there a while before being discovered because at 12:30 p.m. the engine was already cold. When and who returned the car to the lot that day are unknown to this day. Mary's car was full of clues, although very disturbing ones. The keys were missing, and there was a thin layer of red dirt on the exterior of the car to indicate it was possibly driven in the country during its short excursion. There was blood inside on several places, the driver's side door near the handle, the inside window of the passenger side, smeared over the vinyl of the front bucket seats. There were also a few grass clippings stuck in dried blood where the passenger's head would have rested, and a smeared fingerprint in blood on the steering wheel. Another very ominous clue found were women's undergarments. Carefully rolled together and placed between the seats were a girdle, slip, and panties, all speckled with drops of blood. On the floorboard lay a black bra and a section of nylon stocking that seemed to be cut with a knife. The undergarments appeared to be Mary's and had been worn recently. Mary was reported to be last seen wearing a green dress with white flowers, along with a white London fog raincoat and carrying a brown purse, and they were not located in the car. The blood was Mary's, as near as they could tell, as it was her blood type found in her car on her belongings. There wasn't a lot of blood at the scene. Police compared it to the amount you would lose during a nosebleed. Just as the friend had mentioned, Mary's back seat was full of all of the groceries she had purchased the night before. Whatever happened to Mary seemed to have happened Thursday night before she could arrive home. The extensive search for Mary Shotwell Little in Atlanta was unprecedented. Detectives spent nights at the shopping center interviewing everyone who came through to try and garner leads. Police made public appeals and asked private pilots to fly over areas of interest and report anything they might see. Military reservists scoured the woods around Lenox, and even prisoners from the city's stockade joined in the hunt. Local radio stations urged residents within a 20-mile radius of Lenox to check their property for the personal items missing from the car. Reward money was offered as well. 13 days after Mary's disappearance, the bank where she worked offered a $1,000 reward paid for information referring to her as this wonderful, wholesome girl who had a way with people. These efforts were fruitless, unfortunately, and ended up being even more time-consuming, weeding out all the crackpots, ransom demands, attention seekers, and false sightings. During their investigation, police discovered that Mary's husband kept a log of the mileage of their car at every fill-up. After examining the mileage and figuring out the miles Mary would drive on her daily commute, they discovered that there were roughly 40 miles unaccounted for on the car. Police did delve into all aspects of Mary's life before she went missing to try to ascertain if anything could have explained her disappearance. They did look at her husband, who seemed a bit aloof, declined to take a polygraph test, and seemed more focused on getting his car back soon after Mary disappeared than anything else. But it was established he was out of town when she went missing, so it appears he was never really a suspect. Then the most significant and baffling clue in Mary's disappearance was revealed. Police learned that Mary had received 5 roses the same week she went missing. But from who? Her husband didn't know who they were from, and there was no card. They tracked down the florist where they came from, but were never able to determine who sent them. Police also discovered that the roommate Mary had before she'd gotten married, Sandra Green, had also received a dozen roses recently from an unknown person. However, according to newspaper reports, they were able to track down the sender for the roses that Miss Green was sent. However, he was adamant that he did not know Mrs. Little and had never sent her roses. He would, in time, be committed to a state mental hospital. There were some comments made by Mary's co-workers about her actions shortly before she went missing that were certainly intriguing to those investigating this mystery. They said in the days prior, Mary hinted she had something important to tell them, and some friends stated she seemed fearful of being home alone or driving her car unaccompanied. She did not explain why. They had also overheard Mary's part of a conversation at work with an unknown caller. Mary is reported to have said,
"You know I can't come over there. Roy is out of town. I don't hold anything against you. You can come over to my house anytime, but I can't come over there."
During another call, she also made mention of her now being a married woman. Was the caller perhaps an old boyfriend, and could he be the sender of the roses and perhaps a valid suspect in her disappearance? There were also reports of a sex scandal going on at the bank where Mary worked at the time she went missing. Information on this is pretty vague, but in an old newspaper article, it was described as reports of prostitution on the premises and lesbian harassment of employees. It is said the atmosphere at the office was tense and jobs felt threatened. At the time, it was serious enough to even have a former FBI agent come in and investigate, although it seems no charges were ever filed in this matter. There is speculation on how much Mary knew about these allegations and the investigation, and if she could have been targeted and silenced. Although her boss downplayed the investigation and claimed a secretary did not know of the details, Mary's mother and friend claimed she had confided in them about it. Shortly after this lead faltered, calls poured into the Atlanta Police Department from frightened women reporting, after the fact, unsettling encounters they supposedly had with molesters, rapists, and thieves. One even reported that she was attacked in her apartment at 3 a.m., 10 hours before Mary's car was found. There was some concern, however, that these women could have been falsely reporting these incidents as a way of getting into the excitement that the vanishing bride story was now getting. Pastor Wilburn Presley, a minister in Liburn, Georgia, also had an interesting encounter he reported to police. He said within 24 hours of Mary Shotwell Little going missing, he encountered a woman he said looked incredibly similar to her. She looked dazed and confused as he drove past her and appeared to be wandering. Her clothing was rumpled and her hair unkempt. When he asked her if she was okay, the mystery woman did not respond. The lady was later found to be a housewife from Winder, Georgia. She did, however, bear a strong facial resemblance to the missing bride. Just another example of how eyewitness sightings, although well-meaning, can often be inaccurate. Then something came across the wire from Houston, Texas, that gave hope as to what could have happened. Over the last 8 months, 5 women had been abducted from their cars in the parking lot in the Texas metropolis. 1 had been severely beaten, 3 raped, and 1 murdered. In each case, the victim's car had been returned to the parking lot where they were abducted, and some of the clothing left inside. Then on October 30th, 1965, a 21-year-old unemployed hospital orderly, Jerry Michael Ward, was arrested for the crimes. He did confess to the crimes and that he was the person that the press had referred to as the parking lot Romeo. He also admitted to the murder of 18-year-old Joyce Austin that took place in the Houston area, but was adamant that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of Mary Little. He even offered an alibi that was pretty compelling. He had committed 2 of his crimes in the Houston area the day before and the day after Mary's disappearance. Both victims had even identified him as their attacker. So police were convinced he was not involved in this disappearance. Investigators soon learned that Mary's husband's gasoline credit card had been used in North Carolina in the overnight hours the same night Mary disappeared. The card was first used at an Esso station in Mary's hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina, between midnight and 2 a.m., and again a few hours later at an Esso station in Raleigh, North Carolina. Police immediately went to interview the gas station attendants in hopes of gaining more clues. The gas station attendant in Charlotte said a man and woman occupied the front seats and that he could neither describe nor forget the woman because she was curled up in the front seat with her face covered by a road map. He recalls blood on her clothing and she seemed to have a head injury. He put the credit card invoice down under the map and she signed it Mrs. Roy H. Little, Jr. He had not really looked at the man driving, but did write down the car's license plate number. When police tracked down the owner of the license plate, he was shocked as the car had been in his possession all along. The plate had apparently been stolen shortly before Mary's disappearance and placed on the car. Just another frustrating fact in this bizarre case with little to no leads. The Raleigh gas station attendant wasn't much help either. He said the woman was sitting up with a towel around her head and he saw her face but couldn't conclusively identify her as the missing woman. He said there were 2 men in the car. She did also sign the credit card slip, Mrs. Roy H. Little, Jr., and it did appear to be Mary's handwriting. Both attendants got the impression the male in the car was in control and Mary tried to keep her face hidden and did not ask for help. The 2 fill-ups in a short amount of time are confusing. Remember, from the time Mary was missing until the time her car was seemingly returned to the parking lot at Lenox Square was only between 12 to 15 hours. From Atlanta to the first gas station in Charlotte is around a 4-hour drive, and the next fill-up in Raleigh is approximately a 2.5-hour drive. Then it seems her car wasn't put back in the parking lot until the next morning, so if the men seen with Mary were responsible for returning it, they would need to drive almost 6 hours to get back to Atlanta and return her car. Also, remember that according to Roy Little's meticulous record keeping, It is thought that only 40 unaccounted miles were put on the car. This would mean that it wasn't Mary's car that she was reportedly seen in when using the gas credit card in North Carolina. This has proven to be one of the most baffling clues of this case. Shortly after Mary went missing, a pretty 20-year-old woman named Diane Marie Shields took over her job at the bank. She reportedly did not know Mary personally, but did seem to parallel her in some ways. She was to be married soon, had the same job, sat at the same desk reportedly, and even had at one time the same roommate, Sandra Green, that Mary had before she'd gotten married. She did leave the bank job after about a year and started working for another office downtown and moved in with her sister. Diane then got engaged and was to be married in July of 1967. Then on May 19th, 1967, just 19 months after Mary Shotwell Little went missing, Diane left work at Georgia Associated Industries at 5 p.m. Her fiancé said she was to drive right home, but Diane Marie Shields would never be seen alive again. Howard Antle, Diane's fiancé, reported her missing to the police at 1 a.m. on May 20th, 8 hours after she reportedly left work, when she didn't show up at the apartment she shared with her sister. Then at 2:30 a.m., police noticed a car near the drive-up window of a laundromat. Blood was dripping from the trunk. The keys were in the ignition, and sadly, Diane Marie Shields was found in the trunk. Her body had been crammed upside down between a spare tire and a cardboard box. Shields was found fully clothed and had not been raped or robbed. She had been savagely bludgeoned about the head and strangled by a wire or a rope. A scarf and a piece of paper had also been lodged in her throat. It is mentioned that Miss Shields' beating was so severe she had to be identified by her engagement ring and dress. When her fiancé was shown pictures of her battered body in order to identify her, he reportedly fainted. Diane's tragic death could have very well been a random act of violence and possibly unrelated to Mary Shotwell Little's disappearance, but there are a few things to talk about before you decide. It is reported that shortly before she went missing in May of 1967, Diane was also sent 5 red roses by someone anonymously. I did, however, find a newspaper article from the Atlanta Constitution from a few days after the murder that said the roses were a gift from some friends. Diane Shields had babysat their 5-year-old son Charles and wouldn't accept payment, so the roses were a token of appreciation to thank her. Newspaper articles at the time also state that Shields told her closest friend she was working undercover with police trying to solve the disappearance of a woman named Mary. "They want me to work with them so they can solve this case," she is reported to have said. Reports also say that Diane was acting secretive before she was murdered, not showing up for appointments and vanishing for hours at a time with no explanation. After Shields' murder, Detective C.J. Strickland said he thought the two cases seemed related. Upon hearing that, he said that Mary Shotwell Little's mother told him she didn't want Mary's case pursued any further. If and why Mary's mother said these things is unknown, but if true, it is very strange as Mary had only been missing less than 2 years at that point. The only possible clue that was reported in newspapers concerning the Shields murder was a 1963 blue and white Chevy convertible that was stolen from in front of an apartment complex within a block of where police discovered Shields' car with her body inside. The theft is also thought to have happened very near the same time her body was discovered. Sadly, Diane Shields' murder is still unsolved to this day. At this point is when I usually give my opinion on the case, but honestly, I am not sure what it is. At first glance, it looks like a random act of violence, but that would normally result in immediate assault and death, yet I believe the sightings of Mary using her gas card hours after she went missing are credible. Why would her abductor take her hours away, but then come back to return her card to the scene? Was there any significance that the first gas station just happened to be in Mary's hometown where her family still lived? Did Mary have an old boyfriend who was responsible for the calls at work and the mysterious roses who couldn't accept that she was now married and abducted her? There's something about Mary's abduction that seems almost personal as well as sadistic. She wasn't just assaulted at the time she was taken and then dumped somewhere. Her abductor or abductors actually drove around with Mary for seemingly hours, injured and in a very fragile state. They didn't dispose of her with her car or even in a place where she could be easily found. It also appears that her car was returned to the place of the abduction during daylight hours, which is a rather brazen move. Sadly, I do think that Mary was killed in the hours after she went missing, and her body was hidden, perhaps never to be located. I did find a blurb from a newspaper article that could be a clue to what happened to Mary that night if she was abducted by a stranger. On the Sunday after Little disappeared, FBI agent Jim Ponder was helping interview her roommates when a woman named Carolyn Smitherman came in to report an incident. She said she had been walking to her car at Lenox shortly before Little would have left the mall when she realized she was being followed. She jumped into her vehicle and locked the door as the pursuer, a thin man with a brown crew cut, grabbed the handle. "If you think you're going to get in my car, you're crazy," she told him. He tapped the window and said, "Your back tire is low." She soon brought her car to a nearby service station. Her tires were fine. It certainly is a compelling theory, and it would put the sketchy stranger in the area at the time and place where Mary was seemingly taken. Could a predator have been casing the parking lot of the popular mall after dark that night, looking for a female to abduct? The murder of Diane Marie Shields is also sadistic, but in a different way. It seemed to be swift, extremely violent, and her body left with her car, reportedly not far from the route she would have traveled to get home that night. I have seen brief photos of the crime scene, and the beating she received was horrific. Her face was unrecognizable. There was no theft of the car or her valuables, and apparently no motive for the assault other than to kill Miss Shields. This could also be considered a case of overkill, so then you would need to consider if this could be personal and perhaps done by someone she knew. In my research to find out any new information before I prepared for this podcast, I did come across a podcast concerning this unsolved disappearance and murder called Five Roses by Jessica Knoll. It is an 8-part series that speaks with people who have worked on the case for decades and goes in depth on the many theories that have emerged over the years. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you'd like to do a deep dive on this double mystery. I would like to mention a confession that is talked about in the Five Roses podcast, but hasn't seemed to have gotten a lot of attention over the years. A convicted murderer confesses in a letter from jail to police in 1966 that he witnessed Mary Shotwell Little's murder. He says that a friend of his told him that he and another man were paid to kidnap Mary. He asks if the jailed man and his other friend, also a convicted killer, went in on it, and they did. He claims Mary is held in a house in North Carolina and assaulted. Then at some point, as she's in a car being taken back to Atlanta, he is now in the car helping the kidnappers as he watches Mary being stabbed and killed in the back seat. He goes on to say that he next saw the accomplices a week later, and they showed him where they had buried Mary, which was near the Atlanta airport. Of course, a confession being told by a convicted killer while in prison should deservedly hold very little weight. The authorities are still debating whether they believe anything that the convicted killer said in his confession. He did seem to have a lot of specific details about this supposed incident, but it is unknown whether this could actually be true or if it could perhaps be a red herring and the story even fed to him by some unknown persons or people to report to throw the investigation off track. Both the man who gave the confession and the other killer he implicated have both since died in prison, however, so it is likely they took the validity of the story with them to their grave. Is the disappearance of Mary Shotwell Little and the murder of Diane Marie Shields somehow connected? It is still unknown to this day. Although they did follow similar paths in life in some ways, as far as anyone knew, they did not personally know each other. They both did share the same job at the same company. The only thing that makes that noteworthy is the place of employment was said to have had a lot of untoward things happening near the time of these tragic events. Could Mary Little and Diane Shields have known things about suspicious activity going on at the bank that made those involved feel they needed to be silenced? The fact that they each received 5 red roses from someone unknown is a pretty chilling similarity, but it remains to be seen if that is from someone who wanted to bring harm to them, someone obsessed with them, or just a harmless admirer or thoughtful gesture from a friend. It does seem that even if Shields' murder and Little's disappearance are net connected, yet they will always be united in history as two of the most baffling unsolved mysteries to ever happen in Atlanta. So there you have the sinister story of the disappearance of Mary Shotwell Little as well as the murder of Diane Shields. There is an occasional false lead and dig here and there in hopes of finding Mary's remains, but no trace of her has ever been found. The investigation of the murder of Diane Shields is now ice cold. It's been well over 50 years, and it appears that no answers are to be found in these cases. In an eerie footnote, there is yet another mystery to add to the list. That is, most of the case files of Mary Shotwell Little's disappearance and Diane Shields' murder are now missing as well. That concludes our podcast on Mary Shotwell Little. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast, Lost and Found Podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. I try to have a new podcast posted every 2 weeks. As always, you can find all of my articles as well as links to my latest podcasts on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.